Thank you. So great. It's great seeing, all of the different representations of people who are joining us today for our first ever monthly meetup. So thanks so much for sharing your time with us. Some of you may know, you might recognize me through emails and through the training, but my name is Camila Leblanc, the Lakewood's program coordinator. I've been with Living Lakes Canada for about 2 years now, and just switched into a full-time role managing the National Lake Blitz. I started with the program in its infancy through the pilot year in 2021, and through the support of my team, have allowed the program to grow, reaching more volunteers across Canada, building up our data entry methods, and really working to make the program applicable in all parts of Canada. I'd also like to just take this moment to express my gratitude for getting to reside and work on the unceded territory of the Sinixt, the Silts, the Tsinaha, and the Secwepemc peoples. And I'd also like to express my gratitude for your energy and your efforts and the great feedback that you've given on the Lake Blitz program so far. I'd like to take a moment at the top here just to thank our generous funders, the Royal Bank of Canada, and then our partners and donors, Lush Cosmetics, David's Tea, Kicking Horse Coffee, and Water Rangers who built our kits, Earth Rangers, and Aqua Action who helped shape our program. Here's a brief overview of what you can expect today. So I'm going to be talking for maybe another 10 minutes or so, providing a brief introduction to what these monthly meetups are all about, and cover some program updates and reminders. And then we'll get to hear from our amazing presenters from the Invasive Species Council of BC and the Invasive Species Centre based in Ontario. We'll have plenty of time for questions about invasive species monitoring and the Lake Blitz protocol at the end. So if you've had some burning questions about some of the invasives that you've been seeing at your lakes, or how to spot them, or also some technical questions about the monitoring protocol, this is the time to ask them. You can enter those in the chat. So as the presentations are rolling and a question pops in your head, I encourage you to just enter that into the chat, and then we will address those in our question period. And then in the question period, if you prefer to unmute and ask your question, then you can just use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, and then I'll welcome you to unmute so you can ask your question. This meeting is being recorded. So again, if you don't want to be recorded speaking, then you can just ask your question in the chat. And we'll do our best to get to everybody's questions, and any that we don't get to, we'll document those and get back to you over email. And for those of you who are watching this recording after the fact and you have questions, you can reach out to me at the Lake Blitz at Living Lakes Canada email, and I can get back to you right away, or I can connect you to one of our amazing speakers so that they can answer your questions. Awesome. So the idea of these monthly meetups came from the desire to connect more with our volunteers and provide additional opportunities for learning from some of the amazing partner groups that we've been meeting across Canada. Since this is a national campaign, I find it can be hard for us to feel connected as a team. And I know that feeling connected to a group as well as to the lake you're monitoring is an important aspect of encouraging volunteers to carry on doing this good work for water stewardship. We also understand that the world of lake monitoring is, vast and sometimes complex. And through these talks, we hope to make this information more accessible and provide opportunities for you to connect with, professionals in their field to answer your questions directly. So for this meetup, for our first one, we're focusing on invasive species because it's an area where there's so much to know, and it's really important for volunteers to understand how to identify, document, and report invasive species that they may encounter while out monitoring. We're really looking forward to offering more of these opportunities near the end of each sampling month. So the topics that we're looking at for future talks are going to be centered around, wildlife monitoring, the importance of outdoor education, and also, water data management and how this data can lead to decision making. Quick little program update. We're working on developing a frequently asked questions page that volunteers can refer to on our website. And we also have, 220 data points now on the lake observation map. So it's great to see you getting out there, getting your data in. And we're hoping that frequently asked questions page will really help you pinpoint some of the areas that volunteers might be struggling with as we develop our processes a bit more. So a few reminders, this weekend is our last monitoring weekend just for June. So I hope that you'll all enjoy getting out on the lake and collecting more data. It's supposed to be pretty beautiful out this weekend, at least it is in BC. So we really hope you get to, get your hands wet and get to collect some more data points. Also a reminder for all of you photo takers out there that the Lake Biodiversity Photo Challenge is accepting photo entries until the end of July. This is kind of when the program starts to kick up. So make sure you get your photos in. I'm gonna just go into a bit of a description of the photo challenge, just for those of you who haven't had a chance to learn what this is all about quite yet. So this challenge, it encourages you to take a photo of your lake, either capturing the biodiversity or the impacts that threaten lake biodiversity. So this can be the lake you're monitoring, or just a lake that you're hiking to on the weekend, any one that is, close to your heart, or one that's, has a lot of biodiversity, or you can see evidence of those impacts. And those impacts that we're thinking of are, visible pollution, deforestation, wildfire, smoke, or any adjacent industry. For biodiversity, of course, that's the plants and animals that you can capture in a photo. These photos can be submitted on the Living Lakes Canada website, or to my email at lakeblitz@livinglakescanada.ca, or on social media by using the hashtag #LakeBlitzPhoto. So we have those two categories. We also have a third category. For those of you with little ones, there's a kids category, photographers age 12 and under. If you want to submit some of the photos they've been taking, it's a great chance for them to also win some age appropriate prizes. There are going to be 2 prizes awarded per category, so lots of opportunities to win. Winners will be determined by both a panel of judges and by voting on our website, which is sort of like a public voting system. So the judges will look at the most biodiverse and most impacted category. This will be through Living Lakes Canada, our team. And the kids category will be selected by Earth Rangers, who do a lot of really great ecosystem conservation and awareness work with children of all ages. The public favorite, like I said, you can go onto our photo gallery and you can vote for your favorites. There's a lot of awesome instructions there that you can follow. And with all that said, I'd like to just introduce our first speakers, Katie Swinwood and Cassidy Patton from the Invasive Species Council of BC. Cassidy is the outreach lead with the Invasive Species Council of BC and has been with the council for a little over a year. She attended the University of Victoria, where she graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Ecology and a diploma in the Restoration of Natural Systems. She has spent most of her springs and summers participating in exciting research and fieldwork. In her spare time, you can find her fishing Vancouver Island's river systems and hiking with her friends and family. That sounds wonderful. Katie is the outreach coordinator with the Invasive Species Council of BC. She attended Ottawa University and graduated with a degree in physical geography and decided to move out to the Kootenays following graduation. She then went to Selkirk College, where she graduated with a diploma in integrated environmental planning. Katie is passionate about the environment and hopes to make a difference in her career. She enjoys mountain biking, snowboarding, hiking, and adventuring with her dog. Awesome. Me too. That's great. So I'm going to pass it over to Katie and Cassidy. I'll stop sharing my slides and invite you to get settled.
Okay, great. Can everyone see my slides?
Looks great.
Okay, awesome. So hello and welcome. As Camille mentioned, my name is Katie, and I will be giving a presentation today with my friend and colleague Cassidy on behalf of the Invasive Species Council of BC. So I'd first like to gratefully acknowledge that I am virtually presenting today from Nelson, BC, on the traditional unceded territory of the Ktunaxa, Sinixt, and Sayelx peoples.
And I am presenting on the traditional unceded territory of the Comox First Nation.
So the council's been around for 16 years, and we work to spearhead behavior change in communities, organizations, government, and industry to help protect our province from invasive species. We're the largest provincial invasive species charity in Canada, and we have a broad reach, including education, outreach, and training in BC and beyond. We are also a founding member and co-chair of the Canadian Council on Invasive Species, which is the national voice on invasive species in Canada. Our mission is to take action to build healthy landscapes, habitats, and communities through education and responsible practices to prevent the spread of invasive species. So what are native species? Native species is one that naturally occurs in an area. It is a plant or animal that has lived and evolved in a certain place for a long time and is part of the natural ecosystem. It is also adapted to local conditions, co-evolved with other species, predators, diseases, and climate. Invasive species, on the other hand, are organisms not native to a given area. They reproduce quickly and outcompete native species. They cause harm to the environment, economy, and human health, and they lack natural predators and pathogens. Aquatic invasive species come in many different forms, from plants, amphibians, fish, and fungi to different types of parasites. Like all invasive species, these organisms are not native to the local environment and have been introduced to a new habitat one way or another. Aquatic invasive species have detrimental social, economic, and environmental impacts to our freshwater and marine ecosystems. Aquatic invasive species move around by both human-made and natural pathways. Natural pathways include things like rivers, ocean currents, and wind. And while natural pathways don't often move aquatic invasive species as far as human-made ones, that's often how they get dispersed once they've established in an area. Human-made pathways can be separated into transportation pathways and live industry pathways. Transportation pathways, like international shipping, spread aquatic invasives unintentionally. Live industry pathways, such as the horticulture and pet and aquarium trades, can move aquatic invasive species intentionally, but often without the knowledge of the risk of aquatic invasives. So vectors are agents of spread. Cargo ships can transport aquatic invasives in ballast water or as hull hitchhikers. Boats, trailers, stand-up paddleboards, fishing gear, and kayaks can all be vectors of spread for aquatic invasive species if they aren't cleaned, drained, and dried when moving between water bodies. People can spread aquatic invasive species unintentionally when cleaning home aquariums if unwanted organic materials aren't carefully disposed of. Worse yet, people can intentionally release unwanted pets into the environment, which is cruel, dangerous, and illegal. So these are BC's overall climate change projections for 2050. And as you can see here, some of these projections will directly impact our freshwater ecosystems, such as increased drought and water shortages and changes in stream level patterns in lakes and rivers. So now let's look at how climate change and invasive species are connected. In general, climate change in combination with invasive species create novel challenges for invasive species management and biodiversity conservation. So some of these include weather extremes, such as floods, droughts, and fires that leave heavily disturbed areas and create new movement for invasive species. Milder winters and warmer summers, creating longer growing seasons. Global changes in temperature and rainfall, creating favorable conditions for the spread of invasive species. Melting sea ice, allowing for new shipping routes through the Arctic, which again will allow for new pathways of spread. And finally, both higher temperatures and CO2 levels affecting the efficacy of herbicides used in invasive species management. So this presentation and a lot of sampling you will be doing this summer focuses on the impacts of climate change on invasive species and the health of our local watersheds. The climate change projections for rising air and water temperatures will impact freshwater species and facilitate the encroachment of invasive species into aquatic and riparian areas. So for example, it is believed that with warmer water temperatures, some invasive warm water fish, such as yellow perch and small and largemouth bass, will thrive in BC. Additionally, the size and frequency of algal blooms are steadily increasing with climate change. And this is leading to a decrease in oxygen levels in lakes and the displacement of native aquatic species. As mentioned previously, we will experience more extreme weather events. So for example, we had a severe flooding event in southern BC that took place last year, and this created disturbed areas where invasions likely occurred from carried seeds, plant parts, and invasive fish into other waterways. In contained watersheds, like lakes and ponds, invasive species create a high degree of competition with native species for sources of food. The invasive northern pike, for example, are ferocious predators and will outcompete native trout and salmon, leading to native population declines. So you may be familiar with the invasive species in your area, but it is also super important to be aware of the invasive species that haven't yet been established. Climate change increases the risk and introduction of novel invasive species or early detection and rapid response species. So listed here are some of the species in the province of BC to look out for as our climate continues to change. These invasive species could drastically affect our local watersheds, so we want to make sure that they aren't given the opportunity to spread. I'm now going to pass it over to Cass, who will talk about some of the ways we can make a difference.
Thanks, Katie. Okay, so although climate change and invasive species are creating novel challenges for effective management and biodiversity conservation, there are many different ways that we can make a difference and contribute to community science. And so that includes continued learning, observing and reporting, effective management, and behavior change programs. And I will go over each of these in the next few slides. Next slide, Katie. Oh, thank you. So the first steps you can take to learn more about your local environment are the invasive species which are impacting it. And so when looking at the invasive species in your region, you should maybe consider this top-down approach from the broadest level to the most detailed. And so the Canadian Council is the national voice and hub to protect Canada from the impacts of invasive species. Provincial councils such as ourselves in BC and Rebecca in Ontario provide information and research on the species that are considered to be invasive within our province. And it is good to keep in mind that the status of invasive species can vary across the country. So for example, the American bullfrog is actually native to Southern Ontario, but is considered highly invasive in BC. And then finally, if you're interested in learning about your localized invasive species, I would encourage you to check out your regional invasive species organizations. Some invasive species are native to a certain portion of a province, but are considered invasive outside of that zone, which gets a little complicated. But for example, the northern pike is native to northeastern BC, but it does become highly invasive when introduced into other BC watersheds. So your RESO, that regional invasive org, they'll have the most accurate list of priority invasive species for your geographical area. And reporting and observing, that's a great way to contribute to community science and is one of the most important things we can do to stop the spread of invasive species and help protect our biodiversity. And so new species have first been discovered or reported in a geographic area by people using iNaturalist, and invasive species distribution is tracked through Report Invasive BC. And the government, policymakers, scientists, and invasive species specialists also mine data from both of those two reporting apps that are pictured here, the green bird and the red kind of stop sign. So those are iNaturalist and Report Invasive BC. And so there's many different ways that we can observe and report aquatic invasive species, whether you take a clear photo through the water, if you're hooking something unfamiliar on your fishing line, if you're observing a new mussel on the hull of your boat, or even if you find something that's washed up on the shoreline. Those are all really good ways of reporting and observing on invasive species. Okay, so observing and reporting can be done through two different mobile apps. There's Report Invasive BC, which is restricted to British Columbia, and that's a direct line to government officials for information on invasive species. iNaturalist is a species database platform that's used globally and includes native and invasive species. And if you do use iNaturalist, it's a really fun app, so you should. We highly encourage you to join our I Spy and Identify project. So that'll contribute to community science and allow for us at the council to track invasive species in our areas. So all you have to do is go to the projects button, which is at the bottom right of your app screen. You click on that, you search for I Spy and Identify in the search bar, and then click Join Project. Both apps are available for free on Apple and Android devices. And as I mentioned, all the data that's collected from them is used to help develop work plans and map new infestations of invasive species spread. Okay, so when you are out monitoring this summer, please report these invaders if you spot them in BC. There's large and smallmouth bass, red-eared sliders, yellow perch, zebra and quagga mussels, which aren't here yet but are on their way, yellow flake iris, and Eurasian water milfoil. These invasive species threaten our sensitive ecosystems here in British Columbia, so if you see them, we would love to hear about it. And as mentioned earlier, the combination of climate change and invasive species creates novel challenges when managing for them. So in order to manage and control invasive species in changing climates, we need to use adaptive and innovative management strategies. So on the left here is a picture of our field crew participating in a yellow flag iris benthic barrier workshop. So yellow flag iris invades riparian shoreline and can alter hydrology, ecosystem complexity, and suitable habitat for native plant and animal species. And it has dense underwater rhizomes, which make removal really difficult by hand. So a novel control method that has been tested includes cutting the plant down to its base and then laying a heavy rubber mat on top to block out the light and weigh down the rhizomes. And so that innovative control method has actually proven to be quite effective. And on the right is a different way of controlling invasive species introduction, which starts at our borders. So zebra and quagga mussels are listed as an early detection rapid response species here in BC, meaning that they aren't here yet, but they could be soon. These freshwater mussels decrease water quality, inhibit recreational activities, and damage infrastructure like our hydropower facilities. So if you are transporting a watercraft into BC, whether that's a sailboat, a motorboat, a kayak, anything of the sort, it's mandatory to stop at all invasive mussel watercraft inspection stations. It's a lot of words. There's specialized conservation officers who will check out your watercraft and decontaminate it if necessary before it's transported into BC. And so to summarize, managing aquatic invasive species, especially in large watersheds, is very, very complex. And there's always room for improvement and innovative thinking going forward. Those were two really niche examples, but anyone can help manage invasive species by adopting simple behavior changes. So some of our behavior change programs that you can check out include Play, Clean, Go, Don't Let It Loose, and Clean, Drain, Dry, which include simple ways you can reduce the spread of aquatic invasive species. So clean, drain, dry. Boats and other watercraft, including kayaks and canoes, stand-up paddleboards, anything of the sort, they can easily and frequently carry invasive species from one water body to another. So boaters, anglers, paddlers can all take action to help stop the spread by practicing clean, drain, dry. So clean, basically power wash your boat, your trailer, whatever your watercraft is on a paved surface away from the water. You'll drain it, so drain everything completely. Make sure that there's no standing water left in the vessel. And then dry any areas that hold moisture. Don't let it loose. So BC's freshwater ecosystems are actually home to several introduced invasive pet species, including Eurasian water milfoil, goldfish, and the American bullfrog. And so pet owners may release these species thinking it's a humane way to get rid of the animal or plant. And although most released exotic pets will die, several species do have the ability to thrive in their new environments, and that's how invasive species spread. So please consider rehoming your pet, returning it to the retailer, or seeking humane euthanasia if needed to prevent the introduction and spread of aquatic invasive species. For aquatic plants specifically, make sure that you dry and freeze them before throwing them in the trash. So the second part of Don't Let It Loose applies specifically to anglers. So if you fish like I do, please do not transport fish parts, bait, plant parts, or sediment between bodies of water. Just make sure you're emptying and cleaning your bait bucket on land and disposing of any material into the dumpster. Additionally, never introduce bait or sport fish to a different body of water. Two of the most common ways that aquatic invasive species are introduced to a different body of water is by accident or deliberately to create a new fishery. And it is illegal to move fish between waterways and to have live fish in your possession in the wild. So northern pike, smallmouth and largemouth bass, yellow perch, and pumpkin seed fish are all examples of sport fish that have become invasive in certain regions of BC after being deliberately moved between watersheds. Finally, if you haven't already, please check out our selection of interesting and free courses that are available in our Learning Center on our website to continue learning about invasive species and our behavior change programs. And so we just listed some courses that you may be interested in. that include community science, don't let it loose, invasive wise anglers, and observing and reporting. And knowledge is such a key component in effectively managing and reducing the spread of invasive species. And we can all make a difference by continuing to learn and by spreading the word to our friends and family. And yeah, that's all from us. Our emails are on the screen. We can drop them into the chat too if that's helpful. But yeah, thank you.
That's great. Thank you both so much. Yeah, feel free to drop your emails into the chat if anyone has any other questions, or if it comes up later on, you want to connect with Cassidy or Katie directly, then that's a great way to get in contact with them. Wow, there's just so many resources and so many points of learning for making sure that we're aware of invasive species and doing our part to like make sure they're not spreading and becoming bigger problems in other watersheds and other areas. So that's wonderful. I'd like to also point to the invasive species component of the Lake Blitz field guide. You know, we do have our IDs that you've probably seen in there, but I definitely recommend connecting with your regional invasive species society, as Katie and Cassidy mentioned. They really are that go-to resource and can direct you, you know, to take action and report any invasive species and really get to know like what are the priority species that you want to report right away. So that's important knowledge to have as you get more comfortable with water monitoring, or as you continue to use this program to facilitate your own monitoring work. So thank you again so much for that presentation. Another reminder to enter your questions in the chat, and then we'll get to those at the end. I'd like to just share my slides one more time, so bear with me as I get that going. Wonderful. So I'd like to now welcome Rebecca D'Orazio. Did I say your last name right, Rebecca?
Actually, you're the closest so far since I've changed it. It's D'Orazio.
D'Orazio, okay, fantastic. I was practicing that before, so I'm glad I got
Perfect.
pretty close. So Rebecca is the Aquatic Invasive Species Specialist at the Invasive Species Centre in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, where she's worked since 2016. She received her honors degree in biology from Algomoa University at the Invasive Species Centre. Oh, sorry, at the Invasive Species Centre. I focus too much on pronouncing Algomoa University. At the Invasive Species Centre, Rebecca works on programs related to aquatic invasive species prevention and outreach, including the Asian Carp Canada program, utilizing digital tools such as social media, influencer marketing, and email marketing to raise awareness about aquatic invasive species. She also works in the Zooplankton Diagnostics Lab, testing water samples for presence or absence of invasive mussel belugas. Awesome. And with that, Rebecca, I'll stop sharing my slides and I'll welcome you to get yours up.
Perfect. Let's see here. 3, 2. Okay, how's that?
It looks great.
Perfect. So hi everyone, good afternoon. It's, what time is it where I am? 3:34. I don't think that's the case for some of the people on the call, but anyways. So I am Rebecca and I work for the Invasive Species Centre. And before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Invasive Species Centre honors the long history of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation peoples on the lands known as Canada, and strives to show respect to their ancestors, communities, and to them individually. We greatly appreciate the significance of the lands, waters, and all living things, and offer our gratitude to the Indigenous people for their care and for teachings about our Earth. Our relationships with Indigenous communities are important, and we will continue to listen and learn how we can be in good relationship with Indigenous peoples, the lands and waters, and all living things, and act accordingly. And I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you today from the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Batchewana, and Garden River First Nations, as well as the longtime settlement of the Métis people in the Robertson Huron Treaty area. So the Invasive Species Centre is a not-for-profit organization that connects stakeholders, knowledge, and technology to prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species that harm Canada's environment, economy, and society. Our head office is located in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, but we have staff all across Ontario for the most part, and our work doesn't just center in Ontario, it spans across the country and even binationally. You can visit our website to sign up for our quarterly newsletters, our biweekly media scan, and event and webinar invitations. So I'm not going to go into too much detail because Katie and Cassidy did a really good job of explaining a lot of the pathways and what an invasive species is. But just to briefly mention it again, an invasive species is something that's introduced to an ecosystem outside of its native range and has the potential to impact the ecology, economy, or society in this introduced range. So an interesting point that they had made in the previous presentation was that just because something is native to BC doesn't mean it would be native to Ontario. And the same goes. So a couple of the species that they mentioned, like bass and perch, are actually native to Ontario and don't need to be reported here. So this is just kind of a nice little diagram I like to throw up about invasive species and some of the impacts that they can have. They can change composition and diversity in a landscape and alter how the ecosystem functions. They can reduce biodiversity by outcompeting desirable native species, kill plants and trees that provide valuable socioeconomic and ecological benefits, reduce critical habitats that species at risk need to survive, infect, wound, and parasitize or kill species at risk, and they can eliminate or greatly reduce species populations that are only found in one geographic location. They can also place a significant financial burden on all levels of government that work to manage invasive species. And again, I won't go into too much detail on the climate change thing, but just another graphic that we have that I really like to show kind of how everything connects. If you combat invasive species, you're protecting biodiversity. Biodiversity can mitigate the effects of climate change, and mitigating climate change can prevent invasive species. So invasive species in Ontario, a fun fact that I don't love sharing because it's not a very good fact to have, but Ontario has more invasive species than any other Canadian province or territory. We're just a hotspot for them. There's lots of different hubs and ways that they can get into the province, and so we have a lot of them. There's actually 440 invasive plants in Southern Ontario, 39 known or potential invasive forest pests, at least 10 invasive tree diseases, and there's at least 180 non-native and invasive species in the Great Lakes. We do some economic work at the Invasive Species Centre, and we've run a survey the last few years. We recently took it nationally, but I wanted to kind of just touch on the Ontario focus of it for now. We estimate that municipalities and conservation authorities across the province spend about $50 million a year on invasive species. This number, the estimated average expenditure per Ontario municipality is just over $200,000 a year. And then in conservation authority specifically, it's just over $300,000. So this is on prevention, management, control, you name it. But the bottom line is that prevention is the most affordable option for invasive species management. If we can spend less on preventing something from entering, then we don't have to focus on the control and management after. So prevention is key. In Ontario, we have a specific act for invasive species. There's legislation, or there's invasive species throughout kind of national legislations, and you'll find it in some other provincial regulations, but there is a specific act. And it came into force in 2017, and it was just recently updated. Those updates came into play in January of this year. And the goal, obviously, is to prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species. There are 22 species that are prohibited, and 11 species that are restricted. So prohibited species means it's illegal to import, possess, transport, or release these species anywhere in Ontario. And the restricted species means it's illegal to bring them into provincial parks, conservation reserves, and illegal to import or release them anywhere in Ontario. And we choose these species based on their invasive qualities and their potential impact on the environment, economy, and society and well-being. In 2022, there were some updates made to the Act, and this addressed the threat of wild pigs to the province. It added an additional 13 species, and it also regulated watercraft as a carrier, which is a pretty big deal because we don't have anything like that up until this point. So I know a lot of the Western provinces, they have these regulations for watercraft, and there's mandatory boat washing stations, but we didn't have any kind of regulation on a carrier before January. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of the pathways. I know that Katie and Cassidy also mentioned this in their talk, so I didn't want to go into too much detail about vectors of spread, but I just wanted to highlight some that have regulatory implications in Ontario. So live bait is a pathway, and anglers will often use them, and this can lead to the accidental introduction of invasive or non-native species. And now bait movement is regulated in Ontario to prevent the accidental release. So the province is actually divided into 4 management zones that live or dead legal bait fish cannot be transported between. And it's also illegal to dump your bait within 30 meters of any water body, and this includes the water within your bait bucket. And essentially anything that you're carrying, you can't dump. These 4 management zones basically mean that you can only purchase and use the bait within the zone that you're in. So if you're living in Sault Ste. Marie and you buy some bait here and you have it left over, but you want to go to Southern Ontario, you can't use that there. You have to leave it here. Boating, as I mentioned, this is a new thing that we're regulating in Ontario as of this year. So boaters transporting a boat or boat equipment over land, boaters are required to remove or open drain plugs to allow water to drain from the boat or boat equipment, and take reasonable precautions to remove all aquatic plants, animals, and algae from any boat, equipment, vehicle, or trailer. The same goes for before reaching a launch site or placing a watercraft in any body of water in Ontario. You need to make sure that your boat is free of all aquatic plants, animals, and algae. And it's illegal to place a boat, equipment, or any vehicle or trailer into a body of water if any of the above are attached. So it is very highly recommended that you clean, drain, and dry. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because I know that they also did a really good job of talking about that in the last slide. And just because it was BC focused, same goes for Ontario. Reporting in Ontario, we have the Invading Species Hotline, which is managed through the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, and you can call that number that you see there. We also use EDMAPS, which is, as I understand it, I'm not the lead for EDMAPS at the ISC, but I understand that it's being taken nationally. So it used to be edmaps.org/Ontario, but now we just get to go by EDMAPS. And then there's also an app that you can download on your phone or Android. But the most important thing when reporting is to have a photo. I get people calling all the time that say they've seen like an Asian carp, for example, in Ontario waters, but they don't have a photo. And in that instance, there's not much I can do. We need that photo to make sure that what you're saying is valid. And then in the event that it's a species that requires a response, then we can send it out. But if you don't have a photo and we can't validate it, then we can't do a response. So taking photos is very, very important when reporting. So these are just some examples of invasive species in Ontario waters. We have the sea lamprey, zebra and quagga mussels, round goby, and rusty crayfish. Sea lamprey is actually one that I like to talk about quite a bit because it's a very uncommon thing for there to be a success story about invasive species. Once invasive species are introduced to an area, they're nearly impossible to get rid of or eradicate. You'll basically never eradicate them. And that's true of sea lamprey. However, when they were introduced, I don't have the actual facts right in front of me, so I'm going to do my best to do it off the top of my head, and I should be good at this because I talk about this all the time. But when they were introduced originally a long time ago, we were, I think, commercial fishermen in the Great Lakes were pulling in, I want to say 2 million pounds at least of lake trout annually. And then when sea lamprey invaded, it was in the like hundreds of thousands, like maybe 200,000 pounds annually. So the Great Lakes fishery essentially collapsed. People were losing their jobs. We were really lucky to find very specific control options for sea lamprey, which we call lampricide. So these are very specific to sea lamprey and only target sea lamprey, and they are put into the river system when they're in their larval form, kind of attached to the bottom, and it only kills sea lamprey. So this has actually reduced the populations of lamprey by 90% across the basin. And I think it might be like kind of that silver bullet story that isn't the case for, I don't know of another one that has that kind of control opportunity or method. Then there's zebra and quagga mussels. These guys, we have them all over the province, and I know that we absolutely don't want them to spread anywhere else. So that's a really good thing for this new boater regulation is these guys very easily are transported via boat because in their veliger stage or their larval form, they're called veligers in that form, you can't see them with the naked eye. So you don't know if they're in your live well or in your bait bucket or what, and you could be transporting it super easily. In their adult form, they can attach to hard substrates, and actually quagga mussels can attach to pretty much anything, but they can also survive out of water for a few days. So if you're traveling from Ontario and you want to go fishing in Manitoba or Alberta, and you're driving your boat trailer there, and then you bring it into a water body, you could be introducing zebra and quagga mussels. So super important to know the regulations before you go, and clean and drain and dry your boat before you transport it between water bodies. We also have these little guys around Gobi, super aggressive and tiny fish. They eat the eggs of a lot of our native species, and they have also been a vector of spread of, or not spread, I guess, but a vector for avian botulism, because they'll actually eat zebra and quagga mussels, and these guys kind of filter the water so much that they also bioaccumulate a lot of toxins, and then round Gobi will eat them, and then whatever eats round Gobi ends up getting poisoned, and the birds that eat those fish die. So we've seen a lot of die-offs as a result. And then we have rusty crayfish, and these are some pretty aggressive crayfish that threaten our native species as well. So my area of expertise is Asian carps. That's the main program that I focus on. So I wanted to kind of highlight these guys as high-risk invaders to the Great Lakes. There's actually 4 species of Asian carps. Usually when people hear the term, they think it's just this silver carp, the one that jumps out of the water, but it's actually 4 species. We have bighead, silver, grass, and black carp. And all of them are native to Asia, and they were brought to the United States, the southern states, in the late 60s, early 70s for use as biological control. So we brought them here on purpose before knowing that they could cause a lot of damage. They wanted bighead and silver carp to control algae in aquaculture facilities. Grass carp was stocked throughout the southern states to control aquatic vegetation in aquaculture facilities, as well as personal ponds. You could buy them for like $7 a fish and plop them in your pond, and they would eat all the weeds. And black carp were brought to aquaculture facilities to control snail populations. So grass carp have just largely spread because they were stocked across the states, but black, silver, and bighead carps escaped the aquaculture facilities that they were in during flooding events. And so they've made their way up the Mississippi River Basin and towards the Great Lakes and are threatening to invade Canadian waters. All 4 species grow extremely large and very, very quickly, and they have huge appetites to match their sizes. Black carp actually can reach lengths of 6 feet, and there was one caught a few years back just in the south of Illinois, and I believe it was 180 pounds. There's no natural predators in the Great Lakes Basin because of how fast they grow. They would easily outgrow the mouth size of any of our native predators, so nothing would be able to really eat them unless in their juvenile stage. But again, they grow so fast that they would easily outgrow our native predators. This can cause a lot of negative impacts to biodiversity, which would then impact recreational activities and economic activities throughout the Great Lakes. So things like commercial fishing, recreational fishing, wildlife viewing would all be impacted as a result. And these guys specifically are a health and safety hazard to boaters and like water skiing, just any fun you want to do on the boat, on the water, when they're established in these high populations. They don't do this in their native range. Scientists don't really know why. We think it just might be because of the dense populations and the vibrations from boat motors and things startling them, but they jump like 3 meters out of the water. There was a story, I think it was 6 years ago, about a woman who was bow fishing, and she got smacked in the face by a silver carp and broke her jaw, had to get wired shut, because these guys can reach up to like 5 feet. So not in their super dense populations, you're not going to see them that long, but they can get like 2 feet on average. So you don't really want something that big smacking you in the head. This is the identification of the 4 species. The main thing to note with the 4 of them is that they don't have a barbel. They don't have those whiskers that a lot of species have. They also have these short dorsal fins in the middle of their body, and then their eye placement is the big one. So for black carp and grass carp, their eye is level with the mouth. It's in the middle of their head. A lot of our native species, you'll see them either up here and kind of placed far back, but these are like more front and centered, I guess, for lack of a better term. And then bighead and silver carp, they look like they're upside down. And bighead are called that because their head takes up a third of their body. So their eye is below the center of their body. So that's kind of a telltale sign of these guys. So a little bit about the invasion front. I mentioned that they established throughout the southern US and they were kind of making their way north through the Mississippi River Basin. Bighead and silver carp, the leading edge of the invasion for these guys is just at Chicago. They're threatening to invade Lake Michigan, but the Illinois DNR is doing some amazing work and they're removing millions of pounds of these guys annually to make sure that the leading edge of the invasion stays back. And they've done a great job. And then there's also the electric barrier at Chicago that prevents fish from passing through, gives them a little shock. They float to the top, float back down the river, and then they come to and they swim away. Maybe they try their luck again, maybe they don't. Grass carp is a different story. They're actually stocked throughout the states as either fertile or sterilized fish. The states that border the Great Lakes do not allow fertile stocking. Most of them don't allow them at all, but there are some that allow them to be stocked as sterilized fish. So these guys have kind of spread that way. And they're actually, recent evidence has found that they're reproducing in 2 tributaries of Lake Erie in the US, the Sandusky and the Maumee River, a little bit in Michigan, mostly in Ohio. So the Ohio DNR and Michigan are working to remove those, but that's the fish that when we've been capturing them in Canadian waters, they're not established here. I guess I should have mentioned that a long time ago. They are not established in the Canadian waters of the Great Lakes. And I say that because those 2 tributaries in Lake Erie that we're seeing natural reproduction. But in Canadian waters, we've caught in the last, I think, 20 or 15 years, 29 individual captures of grass carp. Some have been sterilized, some have not been. So this is the one that we're the most worried about because of the 4, it poses the most immediate threat to Canadian waters. And I forgot that I had fun little diagrams here, but anyways, that was that. So I'll just skip through. So again, I mentioned grass carp are the one that we're the most concerned about. And these guys can eat up to 40% of their body weight a day in aquatic vegetation, reaching lengths of just over 5 feet, 80 pounds. I think the math is it's 24 cheeseburgers or 12 large pizzas in a day. That's the equivalent. Just a fun little fact. So they have the potential to destroy wetlands and push out native species that depend on them. And our wetlands are already at risk, so this isn't great. So there's some common lookalikes of grass carp and the other species as well. So I'd encourage you to visit asiancarp.ca and you can check out our Confused with Carp section. But when we encourage people to report, this is some of the stuff that we have you look for. That short dorsal fin, eye level with the mouth, and a lack of barbels. Common carp is the most commonly reported species as one of the 4 species of Asian carps. But the difference is they have that long dorsal fin, their eye is at the top of their head, and they have these whisker-like appendages called barbels. There's also the fall fish. Their eyes are kind of more back set and closer to the top of their head. You can't see the barbels, but they have really tiny ones. So if you looked closely, you might be able to find them. They have a short dorsal fin. They definitely look very similar. So that main feature is the eye placement and the size. These guys only get to maybe like 2 feet on a, I think that's the Ontario record, but the average is about 9 inches. So definitely a lot smaller. So if you're in Ontario waters and you think you've spotted a grass carp or any of the other 4 species, but right now, again, we're focusing mainly on grass carp, we encourage you to download the grass carp reporting and ID guide. So again, you can check out asiancarp.ca for that. And then work through it. You can see here we have some common lookalikes and the features to go through to make sure you're very certain that what you've captured is a grass carp. And then the steps here will tell you exactly what to do. And essentially, if you're positive that you've captured a grass carp, we want you to take a photo and report it. So call that hotline. And if you can't reach anybody because sometimes their hours are a little bit different or it'll go to their voicemail, whatever the case may be, and you're certain that you have a grass carp, we want you to kill the fish without damaging the head or the eyes and keep the fish in a cooler with its head above the ice and do not release it because once someone gets in touch with you, DFO will collect it because they can learn a lot about the fish by analyzing it after, like things like where it came from, if it's sterile, if it's fertile, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really important to not release it if you are certain you think you've caught one. So how you can get involved at the ISC. We have a few programs that are great for volunteers, and these are just the aquatics. So I left this link down here at the Invasive Species Centre.ca. you can check out our community science page for a lot more opportunities that don't just relate to the aquatic side of things. But we are currently working on a program called Paddle with a Purpose. So you can join us at one of 2 paddling tours to learn how to identify and report European water chestnut observations. I am by no means an expert on aquatic invasive plants, but this is a pretty nasty one that we want to kind of try and contain if we can. So we're offering 2 paddling tours this year, both which will launch from the EC Brown Conservation Area on these 2 dates, and you can register here if you're interested. You can also support the field team. We have the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, their hit squad field team, and they'll be on the Welland River removing European water chestnut from next Monday until September. So there's some ways that you can help us out if you're interested. And if you are, you can email Karen Alexander, my colleague at the ISC, and she can help you out there. And she'll also have information on that Paddle with a Purpose initiative as well, if you're interested. And I can throw her email up in the chat after. Or you can contact me and I can connect you with her. We also have the iSample Ontario program, which is invasive species awareness and monitoring program for lakes education in Ontario. And this focuses on zebra and quagga mussels. So last year we do this program in partnership with the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Associations. And what we do is we have lake associations that volunteer each year that sign up. And last year we took 25. This year we were able to take 30. And you guys send us water samples that will teach you how to properly collect. And then you send them back to us and I analyze them in the lab for those veligers I mentioned to see if we can see them under a microscope, and we'll let you know if you have zebra mussels or you don't. And in partnership with this, we also do some environmental DNA sampling, and we're hoping to be able to test for more species besides just zebra and quagga mussels this year. But stay tuned, and if you're interested in learning more, you can check out that community science page. Because we're hoping to be able to run the program again next year if funding allows. And if that's the case, then we would be interested in having some more people sign up. And then I think this is the last thing I wanted to mention was our webinar series. Here's the link to check that out, the learn _ and then go to our webinar series page. And we have one each month on a different topic with experts in the field. They're pretty interesting. I think the next one we have is in July, and it's going to be on the reproductive biology of invasive pests and how that can be used to kind of prevent and control their populations. So it should be super interesting. And with that, I will stop rambling on. This is my contact information. So if you have any questions, or if you have one now and I can't answer it, I will definitely do my best to connect you with a colleague that can. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Wow, cautionary tale of getting close to the carps as they're coming up. So anyone out there, if you think you see one, stand far back. No, that's wonderful, and what great opportunities that are coming up for those in the Sault Ste. Marie area to do some more volunteering. So we'll get all those links, and I'll share that in our follow-up email with the link to this video as well. I'm just going to pop my slides up one more time. And then we'll get to some questions. Looks like we finished right on time. So great work, presenters, covering a lot of great material. So we've got a 15-minute question period, and we'll just go as long as people have questions. We might be able to finish early if we don't have any more. Again, if you want to unmute to ask your question, just press the raise hand function, and we'll be able to get to you there. So I'm just going to address some that popped up in the chat. Let me just get my chat box open. Wonderful. So this first one is from Bruce. I understand that many earthworms are considered invasive. Is there a good resource for identifying worms? And are there any recommendations on management? I'm not sure who'd like to speak to that.
Oh yeah,
sorry.
Go ahead, Rebecca. Go for it.
I was gonna say, I don't know much about, I know that there are invasive worms in Ontario. I think they're called jumping worms. So I don't know much about them, but I have a colleague that does and loves to talk about earthworms. So if you want to connect with me, I can put you in touch with him, but I don't know if Katie or Cassidy has anything else to add.
No, that's perfect. We are definitely not worm experts.
No, that's interesting. Well, Rebecca, if you'd like to pop your email in the chat, that would be great. And then maybe Bruce,
Absolutely.
yeah, Bruce can connect to get some more information on that. We do have a raised hand from Mary Ellen Grant. So Mary, I'll invite you to unmute and then we can answer your question.
Hi, thanks, Camille. So I'm just starting to learn about some of the worms. I've moved to the Okanagan and left my wonderful compost back in the Kamloops area. And so I was exploring having some red wiggler worms. I can compost inside my suite in wonderful containers, but the cautions of people buying what is marketed as red wiggler worms and quite often are actually introduced species. So I'm just learning about it. And so one of the biggest, two of the biggest cautions that I have come across is know what you're buying when you're getting the red wiggler worms. Some people are buying from pet stores and the pet stores are marketing them as red wigglers. They're not. And then for people fishing, buying the live bait, and both the speakers spoke about introduce when you're going out there with a live bait. So just really, really avoiding of that. And some people are thinking, oh, I can use live bait for my compost. No, because it's still introduced, they'll escape, especially your outdoor compost.
Wow, no, that really just drives the point home of just making sure that these organisms are, dealt with appropriately. That's something I wouldn't have even thought of, is the impacts of worm composting on introducing species. So thanks for sharing that story, and yeah, cautionary tale. It's good to make sure we're informed. That's wonderful. So one of the questions that I had for now, we'll skip me. There's a great question here from Lori. So her question is, what if I think that I repeatedly saw a nutria? So that's that large rodent with a long tail, kind of looks a little bit like a beaver, in the lake that I'm observing last year, but have yet to see them this year. Is there a specific time of year I should expect to see them? This might be a question for our BC team.
It's a good question. I'm not sure when you could expect to see it. I think they're also like really active. Nutria and beavers can migrate to different lakes, rivers, watersheds all the time too. But I would keep a lookout, especially in the spring and summer months, when they'll be building their little houses. You could see them swimming around, but it's not necessarily a bad thing if you don't see it again either. It could just mean that it's gone to another area. But yeah, that's not really a great answer. But I don't know if Katie, if you know nutria better than I do.
I do not. But yeah, I would suggest if you do see nutria or you suspect you see nutria, to definitely report it. But yeah, that is the only advice I have for you on that.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Lori, if you would like to put that in your other comments in your data, like your next data point, that could be a good way to document, that in previous years I had seen nutria there, just in case, you come back to the site or someone else comes back to your site carrying on and they think that they saw one, then they can refer back to that. So that's always a great piece of information to add. That's great. And yeah, and that just popped a good resource in the chat there. We'll continue on with questions. While everyone's kind of mulling it over, maybe formulating their question, I'll pop in with one of mine. And this is for either Cassidy or Katie. You mentioned that it's mandatory to stop and report to all invasive mussel watercraft inspection stations. Is there like a fine if you don't stop, or what happens if people blow through those checkpoints?
Yeah, so as Cass mentioned, if you're transporting any sort of watercraft, so a boat, a kayak, a canoe, a paddleboard into BC, it is mandatory that you stop. And if you go on the Government of BC website, you can find a map that shows all of the inspection stations. So they have some that are open at night if you're traveling throughout the night. They have permanent ones. And they also have ones that kind of move around BC. But yes, there is a fine associated to it. So it is really important that you stop, and the fine is around $345.
Wow. Okay, thank you for that. That's definitely good to know. And it's just really important for, not just not wanting to get that fine, but just for everything to just stop and go through that process. That's great. We got a question coming in from Annalie. Does Lakewood share the invasive species reports with the invasive species councils or organizations? Great question. And yes, we do. So we document the instances. So we'll download our reports, see if there's been an instance of invasive species, and then we will cross-reference the photos that you've taken, and then we'll share that if it's a priority invasive species with the organizations in each individual region in each province. So yeah, working alongside. If you want to, I would definitely encourage you to have, I know we don't want to have a whole lot of apps, but it's great to have one of the other reporting apps, that the regional organization, uses more regularly. So you can always do like a double observation, either through, Report Invasive BC or EdMaps, just really great ways to make sure that that information is getting out there, especially if it's a priority invasive species, and of course, following through with calling reporting lines. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that description there, our invasive species experts? Okay, great. I see 3 shaking heads. So Megan had a question here too. Should we make note of the invasives we see at our lakes on each survey? For example, I noted bull thistle the first time I went to one of my lakes, but it's the same plants every time I survey. Do I note it every time or just when I see something new? Great question. I would document it if you see any big change, like if there's a change in the spread, if it's a plant species. But I do think that just one reporting for the data set is fine. But of course, if you see those changes, like I just said, like document that, because that can, note that the spread is getting a bit worse. So yeah, I would just document, something new that you see, because we're looking at the data set cumulatively. So yeah, that's great just to have that one time. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, and then I have another question here for our BC group, and then I'll give you a chance there, Rebecca. Are there any ways that youth can get involved in your organization? And I think this question is probably for both of you. So maybe we'll start with BC and then move to our Ontario. Ontario, go.
Yeah, we definitely do in our provincial council. So we have our youth network. So that's for ages 15 to 30. And you can gain like practical hands-on experience. There's lots of webinars and training and things like habitat restoration, obviously invasive plant management, and leadership skills. So you can sign up on our website. It's just a little drop down, and you can meet one-on-one with one of the facilitators in your area to talk about your interests. And yeah, it's a great way to make really meaningful changes in your community.
Awesome, that's great. And Rebecca, any youth volunteer opportunities?
Yeah, definitely. Pretty much anything that we do, we have on that take action page that I mentioned on our website. I just pulled it up to kind of reference it quickly. We do a tree check form to kind of monitor trees and report what we're finding, to survey or to create a better understanding of the current health of Canada's trees. So there's definitely an opportunity for youth to take part in that. Just reporting a sighting in general. Invasive egg mass scraping, you might need like a parent or an adult to help you out with that, but that's to kind of help with the invasive spongy moth problem in Ontario. There could be garlic mustard pulls in your area, so that's an opportunity for youth to get involved. We use the Scouts network often. They kind of participate in some of our events. And then, yeah, I think those are some of the main ones.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great. Another question that came in from Lori. Do you know if there is a similar program to this one for hunters? And Lori, are you referring to like the invasive citizen science programs or the Lake Blitz program? You can pop that in the chat if you'd like. Great. So the invasive part of forestry. So that invasive forestry program that you just spoke of, is there a similar one for hunters, like targeted hunters?
Is that for me?
Yeah, that's for you.
Okay. I was like, okay. Not that I know of, but there is, we have the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters as an organization in Ontario that might have some programming for hunters specifically. That's all I can think of.
No, that's great. That's one of those things, you know, you're working a lot with anglers to increase information on, you know, the invasive fish species that you're seeing, but there's also, I'm sure some concerns when it comes to like terrestrial environments. The hunters could have a lot of, you know, a lot of insight into. And so, yeah, is there a similar program for hunters, you know, in BC from our BC folks?
Not that I know of. It is kind of like our pie in the sky goal to have different like training opportunities with different programs like that, whether that's for hunters or for people who participate in like the all-wheel drive association. They all do whatever their training modules are, and it would be amazing for us to have some sort of invasive species or even climate change associations in their training program. So hopefully to come. That's a whole part of like networking and creating partnerships with them, but it is on our radar for sure.
That's great. Great question. Awesome. Well, big thank you to, you know, all the work that you're doing for monitoring for invasive species and sharing information, education opportunities. It seems like both of your organizations are so busy getting the word out and getting people involved in a meaningful way, which is so important, because this is a big task. Monitoring for invasive species and knowing, you know, each of the individual species as well. It's a huge task. So getting citizen scientists involved is such a great technique for making sure we can do this work. So that's wonderful, everyone. So I'm just going to give, we have a couple more moments here. If you have any burning questions, you can ask them in the chat, but I'll start to go into a bit of a closing here and just say that, you know, I'm so grateful for your time and for joining this first monthly meetup. We're really looking forward to doing more of these with a different focus on, like I said, wildlife monitoring, and then also looking at water data and environmental education, hoping to touch on a lot of the themes and a lot of the learnings that the Lake Blitz is hoping to bring to citizen scientists all across Canada. A reminder that if you have some really great lake photos and you want to submit those to win some prizes, then please do so before the end of July. And you can be entered to win those awesome prizes from David's Tea, Lush, and Kicking Horse Coffee. Check out our photo gallery too to see some of the entries, and you can even vote for some of your favorites. Enjoy your monitoring this weekend. I'm really looking forward to seeing the data next week. And also next week we'll be sending out a follow-up email with some of the links and resources that were mentioned in this presentation, as well as the recording. As always, if you have any questions about the monitoring protocol or are struggling with anything with technology or with the protocol itself, then reach out to me and I'll get back to you to steer you in the right direction or help you with any stumbling blocks. So thank you so much to Rebecca and to Katie and Cassidy for your time. We're hoping to work with you more in the future and get more volunteers connected to some of your great programs.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank you.